So good morning and welcome to Wake Up American Ministries. And here we are midway through March, and it's kind of feeling like late winter, but that's okay. We're going to just remind you this morning that we're going to be preaching this morning in Oak Park at United Fellowship Baptist Church, which is turn left there at the fire department, and I think it's the second or third building there on the right. But anyway, you'll see the sign. Come be with us or go to the church of your choice. And if you have nowhere else to go, you live around Stillmore, please go to the Rock Worship Center and be with them there. And so this morning we're going to be talking about the Feast of Purim. You say, what in the world is that? I think I remember vaguely maybe seeing that on a calendar. Well, back in the day when people put wall calendars up on their house, there'd be a word there called Purim. And you go, what is that? And I think I've heard of it, but I don't really remember what it is. And I'll be honest with you, when I was watching a news program here, this actually took place 2 weekends ago, so we're a little bit behind on it. But we preach what the Lord gives us, and so that's what we're going to be doing today, just to remind us of what this is and what it means to us today. So Purim goes all the way back to the book of Esther. Now, many of you, Esther is a very great book. Well, they're all great books, but Esther's kind of like the book of Ruth. You start reading it and you just don't want to stop reading it until you're through, till you get to the end of it. And so anyway, if you go to Esther chapter 9, verses 17 through 19, this is where it starts talking about this day or two of feasting that the Hebrews or the Jews, the Israelites, they celebrate because of what happened, what transpired through the book of Esther. So just a very quick setting here or backdrop of what led up to all of this was, there was most of the Jews had went into captivity in Babylon and under the Babylonians, and then the Medes and the Persians took over, and so they were still in their captivity time at 70 years. And there was a man named Mordecai, and he had a relative, and I can't remember if they were cousins maybe, or maybe Mordecai was her uncle. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, I didn't get that deep into that. But anyhow, so you know the story, how Esther was unmarried. She was apparently very, very attractive. And there was I guess you may say, a difference rose up between King Ahasuerus and his queen. Her name was Vashti, and how that all transpired. And I'm not going to take time to recap that this morning. Go read it for yourself, because we just don't have the time. But anyway, so the queen was put away and basically exiled, if you want to call it that. And so he needed a new king, a new queen, a new wife. And so Mordecai, and if you go through the early part of the book of Esther, Mordecai heard two of King Ahasuerus' chief officers or officials, whatever you want to call them, and they were going to plot to kill the king. So Mordecai reveals it, and then these two officials are, of course, killed. And then there's a man that rose up called Haman. And so Haman, he kind of let things, I guess you might say, go to his head. And when he would go by or go through the king's gate, there was a man there, Mordecai, and it was expected that whenever high officials came by, that those sitting at the gate had to kind of bow down and give reverence to that person. Well, Mordecai, you remember the story, he wasn't bowing down to anybody. And so Haman developed this hate for Mordecai. But anyway, through the series of events, that Esther eventually becomes, through the process of time, and this thing took several months, maybe even as long as a year to transpire, when Esther became the queen. And so because of Haman's deep hate, Haman began to plot and scheme on how to get rid of the Jews, namely Mordecai. But since he hated Mordecai so much, his hate toward all the Jews, or the Hebrews, or whatever term you want to use toward them, he began this plot, and it's mentioned in Esther chapter 3, verse 6. And so what he did was he went to the king and he sucked up and he, said all these flattering words to the king and basically said, King, you have enemies in the land and you need to get rid of them. And without being specific, he wrote up a decree and the king signed off on it, which basically put a target on every person that was a Hebrew. And so, anyway, so you know how the story went. So through a process of time that Mordecai talked to Esther, they prayed and they fasted for 3 days, and Esther, her job was to go before the king, because see, back in the day, just because she was queen, she did not have direct, immediate access to the king, because they didn't live in the same place. The king had his palace, the queen had her palace. They lived in separate places. Whenever the king desired her presence or whatever, he would send somebody to go get her. And so anyway, so Esther, she said, if I perish, I perish. You remember that statement. I'm sure you've heard that preached on numerous times. She said, I'm going to do it for the good of my people, because one way or another it was going to be revealed that she was actually a Hebrew. And that had been withheld and hidden from the king whenever they got married. But anyway, so you know how this goes. So Haman in chapter 5, and maybe it even started in chapter 4, but anyway, somewhere around chapter 5, Esther decides, well, I'm going to go to the king and I'm going to throw a banquet and I'm going to invite the king and Haman. And through this series of events, you know how that went. Esther held the banquet, but before the banquet, Haman got this invitation, and he realized that it was specific just to him and to the king. So Haman went to visit his family and his wife, and he was, just, I don't know, gloating, if you want to call it that. Oh, just me and the king are going to the queen's house, and we're going to enjoy fine food, blah, blah, blah. And he was really just, floating up there on cloud 9 and bragging about how great he was and his position in the kingdom. And of course, he still had this hate going on in his heart toward Mordecai. And so he reveals the plot to his family. And I believe it was his wife who said, hey, why don't you just build a gallows or, a place to hang Mordecai, build that, and then when the time comes, hang Mordecai from the gallows. So y'all remember that part of the story, right? So anyway, so during the banquet, you know how this goes. The plot is revealed. Esther reveals the plot, Haman's plot, to kill all the Jews, and it infuriated the king because he realized that he had been duped, tricked. But the thing was with them is whenever a king signed something into law under the Medes and the Persians, they couldn't go back and reverse it. There was no undoing it. So, oh, that's terrible. Why not? Well, it just wasn't that simple in the way their government was run. But anyway, so the plot's revealed. The king storms out. He's out there in the garden, and Esther, and I guess he calls it a bed, but it's really not a bed. It's more like a couch kind of thing. You just kind of stretch out on and relax. So Haman is kneeling down, begging for his life to Esther, and he's kind of he's either really close or making contact with this piece of furniture that she is sitting on or laying on or whatever the case is. And the king comes back in and catches Haman. And it just went downhill from there. So then you know how the story goes. Haman then is hanged from the very gallows that he intended to hang Mordecai from. So that's really the gist of the story. But more to it, where did this take place and what does that mean to us today? Well, I didn't mention this at the very beginning in Esther chapter 1. It mentions this place called Shushan the palace. It was in the land of Susa, S-U-S-A. You say, well, where's that at? I have no idea. Well, I didn't either exactly. So I had to do some little bit of research. And it turns out that it's in the land of Iran, the country of Iran. And why is that important to us today? Well, give me a second. I'm going to explain that to you. So, anyway, so if you imagine the Persian Gulf, it comes up, and you got Saudi Arabia on one side, Iran on the other, and you got Israel up to the north of that in the Persian Gulf. Shushan, the palace, would have been in the southwest portion of Iran, in the lower part of Iran. This is where this was. And so today, we know that if you've been following the news, that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear program. And they're not trying, they are. And they need uranium, enriched uranium, to build nuclear weapons. Even though they claim that's not their purpose, the only reason you enrich uranium to 90% or better is to build nuclear weapons. And you know that there's a man over there, and his name, he is the Ayatollah. Well, I think I wrote it down here somewhere, and maybe I didn't, maybe I meant to. But anyway, I think his last name's Khomeini. But hey, all you got to do is Google the supreme leader of Iran, and you'll pull up his picture, and you'll see. Well, he has vowed that they're going to destroy Israel. This is not a new thing. This is something that's been going on for years and years and years. When the government changed back in 1979, when Iran actually had a government that we were on good terms with, and then there was a revolt, and a new government came into power. And for those of you that remember Jimmy Carter and the fiasco when our embassy there was taken over, and they were holding Americans hostage, and there was a failed rescue attempt. And anyway, for you younger people, you won't remember that, but you just Google it, and you can kind of catch up on events. And Iran has been a hotbed of, for lack of a better word, extremists. They take Islam to the farthest extreme. They believe in holy war, and they have vowed to destroy the big Satan. That would be America. That would be you and me, just because we're Americans. And the little Satan, who is Israel. And, you know, there's great conflict over the Temple Mount, and because, you know, Muslims, just like Christians and Jews, place a high value on the Temple Mount. And so ultimately they want to control all of Israel because they believe that that land belongs to them. And so the point is they have vowed to destroy Israel. Just like Haman did. Haman vowed to destroy all the Hebrews that were in the land at the time, and his plot was revealed because God supernaturally intervened here using Mordecai and Esther, and he spared the Jewish people, the Israelites. And again, that's going to happen today. And so, well, how do you know that? Well, because we know what prophecy says. Prophecy says that, you know, one day when the Lord comes back, he's going to set up his 1,000-year kingdom, and he's going to reign and rule from the Temple Mount. So we know that even if they were to gain control of it, it's only going to be temporary. And we know that for a period of time, that the Antichrist will try to reign and rule there for a time, 3.5 years, maybe a little more. But ultimately, Christ is going to sit there and he's going to reign and rule. But anyway, going on to the story. So this plot, they had, they called it pure, P-U-R, or pur, however you say it, pur, I guess you would say P-U-R. And it was kind of like rolling the dice or drawing something out of a box or whatever. So when this plot began to hatch out, they kind of, well, we're just going to call it rolling the dice, okay, or whatever, or drawing a name out of a hat. So what they did, they put the names of the months in a, we're going to call it the hat, and they drew out by lot, is what it's called, the month in which this plan was going to be carried out. And it turned out it was going to be in the last month of the Jewish year. So the Jews had about 11 months or so to prepare for what was going to take place. Now this is how God works, right? So the king, remember I said the king couldn't undo the decree he had already decreed. He couldn't undo the thing that the plot had been hatched, and basically it was going to be okay to go and kill Jews just because they were Jews. And so, anyhow, so what the king did is he said, you know what, I tell you what, I can't undo what I've already done, but I can do this. So the king made a decree, because this is how God works, right? God's great. The king made a decree. He said, you know what, I can't change what I've already done, But I can say this, that the Jews have the right to build weapons and defend themselves. Huh. How about that for a king, you know? So anyway, because the king really loved Esther, and he wanted to spare Esther, and he thought a lot of Esther. And Mordecai, because remember, Mordecai was the one that revealed the first plot to kill the king. So it was revealed that the king, a decree had been made that Mordecai was going to be rewarded, or the person that gave the information is going to be highly rewarded. So you know how the story goes, right? So Haman gets hanged, and Mordecai then ends up taking Haman's spot. So in the process, so on that day, whenever kind of like this day of slaughter, or however you want to phrase it, was going to come about, the Jews rose up, and 75,000 plus of the Medes and the Persians were killed by the Jews who came against them to destroy them. You say, well, what does all that mean, and how does that work for us today? Well, there's lessons in this for us today, because we know that even within our own government, there are people out there that they hate Israel. They can't stand Israel, and some of those people, the Biden administration, even they say one thing out of their mouth and they turn around and do something else. Our government currently, by the current leaders, and I'm going to be bold and say this, they cannot be trusted to support Israel. How you know that? Well, we know what they say. Kamala Harris is very much anti-Israel. AOC, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, very much against Israel. That Ilhan Omar, you know what they call the Squad, are very much anti-Israel. Kanye West, now known as Ye, the comments that he made recently, very, very anti-Israel, and his, according to some things, that some reports that are coming out of Israel, is his Facebook post that he made, or social media, whatever platform he used, has incited a lot of people to commit violence, not just in the land of Israel, but right here in America, with anti-Semitism, hate acts against synagogues and Jews right here in America. Google that, and you will see that crimes against Jews, even in America, has risen dramatically in the last few years. Now, we know prophecy says what? That there was going to be basically a regathering of Jews back to the homeland. And that is happening even as we speak right now. People with great influence who are making anti-Semitic statements, whether they're actors or politicians or somebody with some kind of a platform, that are going and speaking out against the Jews and inciting people to believe that it's okay to go out and hurt Jews and destroy them. Well, let me tell you how this works. Because the Jews, regardless of what they've done in the past, are still God's chosen people. And God's plan that's going to take place, and how all of this is going to work out in future events, it's going to happen. And Israel is the key to it all. Jerusalem is the key to all prophecy. Remember that. So, well, how is the Biden administration, how are they our enemy? Well, there's a report come out, and you know, you have groups out there that they're called like Judicial Watch and such groups, that they watch what's taking place and where money is sent and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's been reported that the Biden administration has given $38,000 to groups within Israel to ride in the streets and protest against Benjamin Netanyahu, because they're wanting to do some judicial reform. We know that Israel has been preparing now for a number of months, even years, to prepare a military attack against Iran to stop them from building a nuclear weapon, because they've not made it a secret that if they get it, they're going to use it, and probably we would be the first ones, because they believe that we would be there to support them. I don't know if we would or not, because the administration that's sitting up there in the White House right now, they're so wishy-washy, we don't know if they're going to support Israel or whether they will not. But anyway, so here's the big red flag, right? Don't be like Haman. We need to be praying for Israel and for the peace of Jerusalem. So, well, where does that come from? Well, I'm glad you asked, because if we look in Psalm 122, in verse 6 through 9, this is what it says. It says, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee. Peace be within thy walls, and prosperity within thy palaces. For my brethren and companions' sakes, I will now say, peace be within thee. Because of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek thy good. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So, well, what does that really mean? Well, we don't have the time to really go in that like I want to, but this is what I'm going to finish with today. Because we got to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, where God and Abraham, where God made a covenant with Abraham, and this is what he said. He said, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. Now he's talking about Abraham, who was the father of, and we know this, he's the father of the Jews. Well, it turns out he's also the father of the Arabs because of what happened between him and Hagar. But anyway, we don't have time to go into that today, but this is what it said. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. All right, so don't be like a Haman. Love Israel, pray for them, pray for our own nation, because, folks, we need revival in our land. A statistic just came out the other day, a few weeks ago, that only 4% of Americans have a biblical worldview. And we wonder why our country's in the shape that it's in. Hey, that's all we got for you this week. Go to the church of your choice. If you don't have a place to go, we invite you to Oak Park this morning to come be with us. If you want to do that, go to the Rock in Stillmore. They preach the word of the truth under the anointing of the Holy Spirit. That's very, very key. So if you go to a church and they're not preaching the whole truth, go somewhere else. Kick those suckers to the curb. Because, folks, we're in a time of great deception. Because, well, I'm going to throw this at you. Only 37% of senior pastors have a biblical worldview. That means 63% do not. So they're preaching a doctrine other than what thus saith the word of the Lord is. All right, that's another message for another day. Hey, we thank you for joining us. Please share. We thank you. We love you. Have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week.